Minneapolis Fed President Neil Kashkari posting a blog this morning saying he advocated for the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates by 50 basis points this week, writing, quote, "I believe an aggressive policy action such as this is required to re-anchor inflation expectations at our target."
Kashkari isn't the only Fed member pushing for a rate cut. St. Louis Fed President James Bullard voted to cut rates by 25 basis points on Wednesday. He was the only voting member to do so. Joining us now for more is Austin Goolsbee, professor at the University of Chicago and former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Trump, or President Obama, excuse me, and David Stockman, former director of the Office of Budget Management under President Reagan, and author of Peak Trump.
Yes.
Thank you both for joining us. David, I'll start with you. I'm looking at some talking points from you, and you believe that a Fed move to ease would be a colossal error. Why?
Yeah, it'd be the worst error the Fed has ever made because of two reasons. One, it can't do anything for the Main Street economy, the macro economy.
Why not?
Because we have been at rock bottom interest rates for 10 years. The Fed is essentially, to paraphrase Donald Trump, pushing on a big, fat, ugly noodle. In other words, there isn't any more borrowing that's going to happen in the household or business sector, even if they lower rates by 50 basis points. Why do I believe that? Because the household sector, 90% of it is tapped out. At peak debt, they can't borrow anymore. Let me give some numbers on that I think prove it. In the 90s easing cycle, average household debt growth was 7.5% a year. In the 2000-2007 housing bubble, it was 9.5% a year. In the last 11 years since the crisis, it's been 0.25%. The household sector, other than student loans, which aren't affected by the Fed anyway, is tapped out. So you're not getting anything there. Now let's go to the business side. Will that cause more borrowing and more CapEx? Absolutely not. We just had a $125 billion tax cut, and in the last 3 quarters, the average growth rate of real investment has been 3.3%. In other words, there is no barrier to economic expansion from interest rates. They're at rock bottom. The only thing it will do is inflate assets on Wall Street, nothing for Main Street, until we finally get a bubble collapsing under its own weight, like in 2008, like in 2000. Mm-hmm. And in this world that we're in today, this isn't your grandfather's world anymore, where the Fed would tighten, credit would dry up, and the private sector housing would collapse and so forth. Today, recessions are caused by bubble collapses on Wall Street. And the Fed, in saying that it's taking out insurance and trying to prolong the cycle, is actually going to deliver the very asset bubble collapse that will cause the next recession.
To that point, Austin, do you think that Jerome Powell is looking a little bit too closely at the stock market these days?
Maybe. You know, David and I have been debating this same topic for 9-10 years now. There are some aspects of what he said that I agree with, which center on when you get close to this zero lower bound, anybody in the market who thinks that the Fed cutting rates by 50 basis points is going to stave off a recession if one is coming, I think that's unrealistic. Now, where I disagree a bit, I think if the Feds were to start raising rates, that will be the catastrophic thing. Yes, it's true they can't generate prosperity, but I think they could certainly destroy prosperity by raising rates. I think it would harm investment even more. Investment's already slowing. That would harm it even more. You see housing slowing. You will harm it even more. So I think the Fed is doing what it needs to do, but we should all reorient our expectations of how big of a positive that's going to be.
Yeah.
But Austin, I guess in relative terms, though, there's other central banks who are in even more of a bind. And again,
yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. You'd rather be in our position where you at least have a little bit of wiggle room. But the argument that, in essence, that to prevent bubbles, we ought to engage in austerity, I don't agree with that. And I think the post-financial crisis period in Europe suggests that if you engage in austerity, you actually do even worse.
But let me just say, who's talking about austerity? I would point out for the last 10 years, the federal funds rate has been under the inflation rate, measured as the 16% mean trim CPI, which is a good, stable measure. 11 years, from 2008 to the fall of 2018, it was underwater. Negative real carry cost, which was wonderful for Wall Street. It did nothing for Main Street. And if we were to normalize interest rates, it would cause the bubble.
3.8% unemployment.
Pardon?
You have pretty good wage growth.
I think that had very little to do with the interest rates, which never got out into Main Street anyway. Okay, as I said, households didn't borrow, so how did it help household spending? Business investment in real terms after depreciation has been basically flat for the last 10 years. So what it did was reflate the bubble. We're up 300% from the March bottom in terms of the various stock market indices. That's what it did. And now the Fed has backed itself into a corner. It can't let the bubble collapse, or it will cause a recession like 2008, like 2001. On the other hand, if you keep inflating this thing, you're ultimately going to have an even worse disaster down the road.
Austin and David, we will leave it there. Thank you both very much for joining us.